We love to see Christopher Abbott in a movie where it really does actually come at night. Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and we are of course talking about Leigh Whannell's Wolfman, starring Christopher Abbott's Julia Garner and Matilda Firth. This is of course the second film from Leigh Whannell adapting one of the classic Universal monster movies. He of course directed The Invisible Man a couple years back and is now continuing his string of successful Universal monster adaptations, in my opinion. And I'm sure you've heard at this point that this movie is not as strong as The Invisible Man, but that's because that movie was truly something special. It was a massive surprise for a lot of people, but I think he still has a hit on his hands with this movie. Of course, I will be talking about spoilers for Wolfman, so if you haven't seen this movie and enjoyed Whannell's previous films, then I think this is a pretty good time at the theater with a film that frankly doesn't try to be anything more than exactly what it is, which, you know what, I'm okay with that. So let's get into the things that I really liked about this movie, and that mostly has to do with the style and cinematography and sound for this movie. There's a specific moment in this film where I think the entire audience, including myself, really got invested in the story, and that's the moment where Christopher Abbott's character starts to gnaw off his own arm, which was really great. I love me some good body horror, and it's great to see the trend of body horror come back in recent years. One thing that I'd actually like to stress about this movie is that it is a Wolfman movie, not necessarily a werewolf movie in a general sense where a character turns into a werewolf when the full moon comes out. No, it's not the type of transformation that you saw in a movie like American Werewolf in London, which I absolutely love that transformation, and it's still to this day my favorite werewolf movie. But Wolfman is, in this movie at least, is very much true to what the Wolfman was back in the original film, and that is simply a guy in some really great prosthetic makeup that makes him half man, half wolf, with a little bit more of an emphasis on man. And I can see some people complaining about the look of the Wolfman in this movie, but I don't know, I really dug the design and the grossness and the gradual transformation that Christopher Abbott went through throughout the second act of this film. One of my favorite moments in this movie was actually a subtle one. It was when Abbott is trying to board up the front door of the house after they got in the accident that trapped them inside of his childhood home, which, by the way, that accident scene was also pretty great, but at this point he has already been scratched and he begins to hear a noise inside of the house that sounds like a constant knocking somewhere, maybe upstairs, maybe it's somebody hiding inside the home, or maybe the Wolfman is just trying to get into the house from upstairs. So he goes over to investigate it by opening the closet door, only to see a tarantula climbing up the wall in the closet with every step of his 8 legs causing that loud knocking sound, which is showing that his senses are becoming more and more heightened as his transformation begins. It was such a great use of sound design. And then you have, of course, the cinematography, which, similar to that of The Invisible Man and Upgrade, has a lot of great locked off shots that are in the perspective of the main character as he is transforming. When he's leaning against the wall, the cameras tilt with him. When he falls to the ground, the camera falls with him. There's so many great shots that also convey this transformation as we progress throughout the entirety of the second act. And honestly, I think a lot of movies do struggle in the second act. You usually get a really solid setup and the second act begins to drag, and there's always, a really great, third act to cap off the entire film. And a lot of the complaints with movies like this specifically are that they spend too much time building that second act. But that actually wasn't the case for me for this one, because this transformation I thought they did such a great job with when it comes to the makeup and the body horror and the cinematography and of course the sound design, which all add to the building of suspense throughout the entirety of the second act, which made it one of the stronger aspects of this film. And going back to that first act, the film actually doesn't waste any time to get into this actual transformation and the actual meat of the story, but it's also at the expense of some more solid character foundation and character building. I do like the family that is involved here. I do like Christopher Abbott as an actor and a performer, and I really do like Julia Garner in Ozark. However, I think the strength of these characters lie between the relationship between father and daughter. There's a really great game that they play where Abbott holds his daughter's hand against his forehead and asks her to essentially read his mind, and every single time he has the exact same answer, and that is that he loves his little girl. And of course, as the transformation progresses throughout the second act of this movie and he becomes less and less human, that still comes to play where she knows, even though her father is becoming something entirely different, she knows that at his core, deep down, he still loves his little girl despite all the horror that he's putting her through. Also, I absolutely love the effect that they use, panning between Ginger's perspective during these scenes to Blake's, and seeing that they can no longer communicate and that Blake is starting to see their eyes glowing. Great visuals to accompany this heartbreaking divide between these characters. I love the style and the look that they had for the Wolfman perspective. Then there's the relationship between Blake and Charlotte in this movie, which I think is a bit weak. I get the attempt to put these characters in a struggling relationship. They are at a point where they're not really happy in their individual lives. Christopher Abbott is in between jobs at the moment, where his wife has a very successful but demanding job as a journalist. The strain in this relationship is the inciting incident to make these characters go out to the father's cabin to gather his stuff after he is pronounced dead officially, since he has been missing for quite some time. And And so I do understand that this subplot is important to get the story moving. However, I think it is at the expense of some good chemistry between these actors, because I do think that they are vastly talented actors who should have great chemistry in this movie, but because they feel so distant at the beginning of this movie, it's hard to get fully invested in their attempts to survive as a couple, since they don't really seem to like each other very much at all from the very beginning. But like I said at the top of the review, when it comes to a strictly 90-minute long horror film from Blumhouse specifically, I don't mind if this movie doesn't try to be as deep and thematic as some other films from other studios. I've said it in many videos in the past that there is a clear difference between movies from either Neon or A24 when it comes to their horror movies, or even to the movies that Shudder releases. And of course, then you have the Blumhouse releases, which tend to be more for general audiences with the type of horror films that they make. And I think that this movie is one of the better ones that they have released in recent years, even if it doesn't transcend their baseline level of general audience horror. There is something to be said about this movie's theme of domestic abuse between Christopher Abbott's father and himself when he was younger. Maybe not physical abuse, at least maybe it's alluded to, but there's definitely verbal abuse in that relationship. Yes, I do think the dialogue in this movie is a bit on the nose, essentially telling you how the characters feel rather than you seeing how they feel throughout their actions and through the performances. But one line that does kind of explain the theme of this movie is one where Christopher Abbott tells his daughter that as a father, you got to try to protect your kid from being scarred by life. And sometimes in preventing them from being scarred, they end up being the one that scar their child. And I do think that this theme is present throughout this movie, but I don't think that the theme is explored as deeply as maybe this movie could have. And so when it comes to my negatives for this movie, although I don't mind this movie being fairly simple, I did think that there was room to improve, although technically I don't think this movie needed to expound on those themes to be a successful horror film. I honestly don't know if Blumhouse will ever release another movie that transcends their status quo as much as films like Get Out did or Invisible Man, but I am happy to see that this movie didn't fall flat like Imaginary or Night Swim did. Now getting to the third act of this film, I did enjoy the confrontation between Christopher Abbott's mid-Wolfman transformation and his father, who was transformed into the Wolfman prior to him. I love that entire sequence of him realizing that he was the one who killed his own father in this moment, resulting in him running away from home to try to protect his own family from that same fate, trying to leave his family with the memory of who he was rather than who he eventually becomes. Also in the third act, there was a great sequence of Julia Garner fighting off against her husband or the Wolfman at this point in the story inside of the barn, where she stares into complete darkness. I think the movie actually uses darkness in a really interesting way, especially when it pans over to the Wolfman's perspective and you can see everything clear as day. It was a great use of the effect, although if he could see everything clear as day, I don't know how he didn't see the bear trap that she had set up for him, but you know what, it was still a great moment. I also love the fact that this movie goes full circle, going back to the treehouse where the movie began, and it's now exactly where this movie is going to end, with Christopher Abbott now being on the other side of the situation as the Wolfman, where he allows his wife to essentially take him out before he lets this new Wolfman persona fully take over his body and mind. He of course told his family that there was a very beautiful valley that he wanted them to see, because you know, he knows that when he was a kid, when he looked up at the beautiful nature he grew up in, which is also nature he looks up in his moments of his death, he just knew that everything was going to be okay. And the movie does end on a final shot of Charlotte and Ginger standing within that valley, looking to the distance, knowing that everything will be okay, that they have made it until dawn. Which also, have you seen the Until Dawn trailer? That movie looks so good. I cannot wait for David F. Sandberg's Until Dawn movie. Cannot wait for that. But you know what? That's where this movie ends. A fairly simple horror thriller with some great body horror, great cinematography, some great sound design, and a slightly lackluster characters. But at the core, there is a really great relationship between father and daughter that I was really able to attach myself to. Overall, I would definitely recommend this movie to those who want a simple, fun monster movie in the month of January. And honestly, as far as January horror movies go, this one is pretty solid. But those are just going to be my thoughts on Wolfman. Let me know what you thought of this film in the comment section down below. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more videos just like this. I just uploaded my review for Skeleton Crew, which I would highly recommend. Some of the best Star Wars out there, along with my upcoming reviews for the Sundance Film Festival in a couple of weeks. But before we get into the Sundance Film Festival, there's one more movie left to review before that festival happens. That is Steven Soderbergh's Presence, so I will be talking about that next week. So like I said, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you all in my next one.